The diner sat at the edge of the world. At least that's what it felt like to Nathan Sterling as he watched the rain slick down the broad window pane beside his booth. Beyond it, the Pacific Ocean heaved under a steel-gray sky, waves washing rhythmically against the jagged Oregon coastline. The sign outside read, Millie's Place, Est, 1968, its flickering neon barely visible through the mist. Inside, though, the world was warm. Smells of coffee, eggs, and cinnamon pancakes filled the air, and the soft clink of cutlery gave the diner the comforting hum of lives gently lived. Nathan sat across from his son Liam, who was busy drowning his pancakes in syrup. A steaming mug of black coffee rested untouched in Nathan's hand. He was overdressed for the place. Tailored coat, cashmere scarf, the faintest edge of impatience shadowing his otherwise handsome face. It was the second day of their short father-son trip, one recommended by a therapist he wasn't entirely convinced they needed. Still, he had agreed. For Liam. The boy's eyes sparkled with curiosity even in the subdued light, his messy brown curls slightly damp from the dash in from the car. Liam was chatterbox cheerful, the kind of child who asked questions Nathan never knew how to answer. Ones about animals, outer space, ghosts, and lately, his mother. Especially his mother. Nathan had never figured out how to talk about Maya. He kept her alive in photos, not stories. "More syrup, buddy?" came a voice, soft but certain. Ella Brooks approached the table with a smile that managed to be both polite and genuinely warm. Her dark auburn hair was pulled into a low bun, strands curling where the humidity had won the battle. Her uniform was simple. Black jeans, a gray tee under a navy apron with Millie's stitched in red thread. But there was something quietly striking about her presence. Not just in her posture or her voice, but in the way she seemed anchored, like someone who had been through storms but stood anyway. As she leaned to refill Liam's orange juice, the silver pendant around her neck slipped into view. A small oval locket, worn with time, a delicate rose etched on the front. Liam froze mid-bite. "Dad," he said, blinking up at Nathan. "The waitress's pendant. It's the same as the one in Mom's photo." Nathan's cup clattered softly against the saucer. He looked up. Ella had paused, noticed the shift in air. She straightened. Nathan's face drained of color. His world, rooted in logic, compartmentalized, perfected, tilted. The pendant. That pendant. The one Maya had worn the day they met. The one he had kept in a small velvet box after she passed. The one she said had been given to her long before they ever met. He stared at it, then at the woman wearing it. And for the first time in years, Nathan Sterling, the man who had conquered Silicon Valley, froze. The rain kept tapping gently against the windows, the sound of the world going on, unaware that something unspoken had just cracked open. Ella shifted uncomfortably under his gaze. "Is everything okay, sir?" Nathan opened his mouth. No words came. But in his mind, a door long sealed had just creaked open. And beyond it, ghosts began to stir. Nathan sat stiffly in the leather seat of his rented SUV, hands gripping the steering wheel long after the engine had started. The wipers moved in slow, tired arcs, brushing aside sheets of misty rain that continued to fall like an afterthought of the sky. Liam sat beside him, unusually silent, cradling a to-go cup of hot cocoa in his hands. Neither spoke. The air between them was thick with something unnameable. In Nathan's chest, a pulse throbbed, an ache that didn't feel entirely new but had found a new place to land. Maya's death had been sudden, a car accident on a fogged-out morning. Nathan had been on a flight to Tokyo when it happened. By the time he landed, he was no longer a husband. The months that followed were a blur of silence and light that hurt to look at. Liam was only a baby then, just old enough to sense the shift in the world around him. Nathan, A self-made tech magnate had spent the previous decade building something vast. Startups, platforms, data analytics that shaped industries. But when Maya died, none of it mattered. His empire had no language for grief. He stopped smiling, stopped risking, stopped remembering. He kept the pendant in his nightstand. A silver locket Maya always wore. She once told him it had been a gift, though she never said from whom. When he asked, she only smiled in that distant way of hers, said, "It's the only thing I had before everything changed." He assumed it was a childhood keepsake, something lost and found. Maya's past had been a quiet thing. She spoke little of it, only ever mentioning that she was raised by relatives and left home young. He hadn't pressed her. He'd respected the boundary. But now, in a tiny Oregon diner far from the curated glass towers of his life, a woman neither famous nor familiar had worn the same locket. Not a similar one. The same. Back inside the diner, Ella leaned against the edge of the stainless steel prep counter, still holding the juice jug. Her breath felt shallow. She hadn't meant to cause a stir, but the way that man, Nathan, she remembered from the credit card slip, had looked at her made something twist inside her chest. Not desire, not fear. Something colder. Older. She gently touched the pendant where it rested just below her collarbone. She'd worn it every day since she turned 16, the year she found it tucked inside the hospital-issued baby blanket that had come with her last foster file. The records had been sparse, no full name for the mother, just infant female, relinquished. The locket was all she'd ever had of her beginnings. Oval, silver, etched with a single blooming rose. Inside, the backplate bore a small engraving, for M with love, A. It had been a riddle without a key her entire life. She used to imagine M stood for mom, and A was the name of someone who loved her. A father? A friend? A ghost? The fantasy faded, as all her childhood dreams had. Art school had been a hope once, until student loans and real life made that impossible. She started waitressing at 20 and hadn't stopped. Millie's was kind to her. The owner, Linda, paid cash when Ella needed it, let her pick up extra shifts without question. Still, there was always that feeling, that sense of being a stranger to the world, a girl with no origin, floating untethered, until today. Until that boy, Liam, had looked at her with something like recognition. Nathan returned less than 10 minutes later, Liam in tow. The boy trailed behind his father, looking uncertain. Ella noticed immediately how different Nathan looked, his composure fraying at the edges, as though he were barely stitched together. She was wiping down a table when he approached. His voice, low and careful, startled her. I'm sorry if we made you uncomfortable. May I ask where you got your pendant? Ella stiffened. It was mine since I was a baby. You're sure? It wasn't a gift, or... She hesitated. No, it came with me. I was adopted. Well, in and out of care. The pendant was the only thing I had from whoever left me. Nathan's eyes searched her face. He looked like a man seeing someone through fog, trying to name them before they vanished. May I see it? Just the back. There was a long pause. Then, silently, Ella lifted the chain over her head and placed the pendant in his open palm. Nathan's breath hitched audibly. He turned the locket over. His fingers trembled. For M, with love. A. The engraving hadn't changed. After all these years, the same words, the same font, the same locket. Ella watched his face. Something about the way his eyes filled with tears, the way his body slackened, told her this wasn't about jewelry. It was about someone. Is this Maya's? She asked, her voice barely audible. Nathan looked up, at her face, at the pendant, at Liam, who stood watching all of this with wide, quiet eyes. Then, without a word, he handed the locket back, turned on his heel, and left the diner. Liam hesitated in the doorway, then ran after his father, his cocoa now forgotten on the table. Outside, the rain fell harder. Ella stood by the window, watching the SUV pull away, her pendant clutched in her hand like a heartbeat. Her world had always been painted in muted tones, blurred edges, but now something had sharpened. There was a connection here, a link between her and someone she never knew, maybe more than one. And that man, who was he really? What did he see when he looked at her? She didn't have answers, but for the first time in her life, she knew where to start asking. The ocean was still restless the next morning, churning beneath a gray sky that never quite broke. Nathan sat alone on the motel balcony, cradling a mug of untouched coffee, his thoughts far from the mist-slick coastline. He hadn't slept. Something in Ella's eyes had taken root in him. Unearthed memories he hadn't known were still buried. Maya's gentle laugh, her careful silences, the way she clutched that locket during her more distant moods. He'd always believed they had shared everything, that whatever Maya had carried from before, whatever secrets she kept, had been left behind when she chose him. Now, a young woman with Maya's fire in her gaze wore the same pendant, and Nathan felt like a man suddenly aware of shadows in rooms he thought he knew. He made a call. "I need you to look into someone for me," he told a contact back in San Francisco. A private investigator he'd used discreetly in business matters, nothing personal. Until now. He gave her the name Ella Brooks and what little he knew. Approximate age, place of work, no known family. He didn't say why. By the third day, Nathan returned to the diner. It was just past the breakfast rush. Rain beaded on the windows. Soft jazz murmured from a wall-mounted speaker. Nathan stood in the entrance longer than necessary, scanning the room until he saw her. Ella was at the counter, refilling sugar canisters. She looked up as the bell over the door jingled. For a moment, her expression flickered with caution. Then, something resigned settled over her features. He approached slowly. "I came to apologize," Nathan said, "and to ask if I could talk to you, just for a minute." Ella eyed him. "You sure you're not here for another look at the pendant?" He offered a tired, almost embarrassed smile. "I won't ask about it, not today." After a beat, she nodded and motioned to the booth near the window. They sat across from each other again, this time with no child, no coffee, no pretense of casual. "I wasn't trying to upset you," she said after a moment. "That locket, it's all I have of my past. I never knew it belonged to someone else." Nathan shook his head. "I don't think it did. I think it belonged to both of you." She frowned. "Both of who?" He looked down. "Someone I loved. My wife, Maya. She died 10 years ago." Ella leaned back, silent. "She had a locket, just like yours," Nathan continued, voice low. "I thought it was one of a kind. She never spoke much about her past, but she always wore it. She said it was the only thing she had before everything changed." Ella's fingers instinctively touched the pendant. "I was left at a hospital," she said softly. "No note, no name. Just the locket in a blanket. They said I was a day old." Nathan's breath caught. He stared at her as if seeing her again for the first time. "And you were never adopted?" She shook her head. "Foster homes. I stopped counting after the 8th. I learned early not to get too attached to anything, or anyone." He saw it then, the practiced stillness, the way she spoke in half-truths to guard against disappointment, but also the fire beneath it, a stubbornness that refused to let her break. Maya had been like that. "I used to paint," she said suddenly, surprising herself. "Was going to go to art school. Even got in. But dreams don't pay for rent, and I didn't have anyone to fall back on. So here I am." Nathan's throat tightened. The daughter of a woman he had loved more than anyone. Sitting across from him, unknowingly carrying the same blood, the same grit. The pendant. The timing. Maya's silence. Something in him knew. even before the call came. The investigator phoned that night. Nathan stepped onto the balcony, heart thudding. She was born April 3rd, 97, the woman said. Hospital records list the mother as Maya Lane. No father named. The baby was placed into state care 2 days later. Maya was 18. From what I can tell, she was living with a distant aunt who pressured her into giving the child up. The paperwork was sealed shortly after. Nathan leaned against the railing, eyes wide, breath shallow. "You're certain?" he asked. "There's no doubt. Ella Brooks is Maya Lane's biological daughter." Nathan closed his eyes. Maya had a daughter, before him, before everything, and she had never told him. The weight of it hit like a slow-building wave. Ella wasn't just a stranger who reminded him of Maya. She was Maya's, which meant she was Liam's half-sister, which meant family. Nathan sat down heavily in the motel room's armchair, running both hands through his hair. He wasn't angry, not yet. He was stunned, then hollow, then overwhelmed. Why had Maya kept this from him? Had she meant to tell him and couldn't? Had she believed it would complicate the life they were building? Had she been ashamed? Or had she never truly stopped mourning the baby she'd given up? The questions multiplied, each one carving deeper. And now Ella, this woman who had lived without knowing her mother's name, was standing in the wreckage of secrets not her own. How would she react? Would she even want to know? He had no idea how to tell her. But he knew he had to. Nathan went back to Millie's the next day. Ella wasn't there. Linda told him she'd taken a shift off. A rare thing. "She okay?" he asked. Linda narrowed her eyes slightly. "You tell me." Nathan left his number and asked her to pass along a message. "I need to talk to her. Please. It's important." That night, he sat on the beach outside the motel, the cold sand soaking through his jeans. Liam had fallen asleep early. Nathan watched the tide crawl back toward the shore. He thought about Maya, about how she used to walk the beach near Half Moon Bay, eyes scanning the horizon like she was searching for something. He'd thought it was peace. Now he wondered if it was someone. A child. A daughter. Ella. Nathan had delivered dozens of keynote speeches to rooms full of investors. He'd once talked a board of directors out of a hostile acquisition with nothing but a glass of water and 20 minutes of precision. But now, standing at Ella's front porch, he could barely lift his hand to knock. It was a modest single-story rental on the edge of town, with a narrow garden blooming with lavender and overgrown daisies. Faint light seeped through the curtains. He didn't know if she'd open the door. He didn't know what he'd say if she did. His heart beat like it was bracing for impact. He knocked. Nothing. He turned to leave. The door creaked open behind him. Ella stood there barefoot in a soft, oversized sweatshirt, her hair down for the first time. Her expression was unreadable. "You came to ruin my week again?" she asked softly. Nathan offered a sad smile. "I came to tell you the truth." Inside, the house was sparse but warm. Art supplies cluttered a table in the corner. A half-finished canvas leaned against the wall, a seascape in brushstrokes of aching blue. Ella made tea for both of them. Neither drank. Nathan sat on the edge of a worn love seat, elbows on his knees, hands folded like prayer. "I didn't know about you," he said finally. "Maya never told me." Ella watched him, unmoving. "After the diner, I couldn't let it go. I hired someone. I had to know. I needed confirmation." Her voice was flat. "Confirmation of what?" "That you were hers." The air grew still. "Ella, Maya was your mother." She didn't cry. She didn't move. Her fingers gripped the edge of the teacup tighter. "I thought," she began, then stopped. "All these years, I thought maybe, but I never imagined I'd meet someone who actually knew her." "She gave birth to you when she was 18, Nathan said gently. The records say she was living with a strict aunt. It wasn't her choice to give you up. I believe that. Ella's mouth tightened. She never told me about you, he continued. And I hate that. I hate that I didn't know, that I couldn't find you sooner. Silence. Then quietly she said, I found a letter. Nathan looked up. Ella rose and crossed the room. From the bookshelf she retrieved the locket and held it in her palm. It lay open now, but in a way it never had before. There was a tiny crease where the inner lining had been lifted. Inside, folded so small it could have been missed for decades, was a note. Worn, yellowed, handwritten. She handed it to Nathan. His breath caught. It was Maya's handwriting. No doubt. My dearest girl, if you ever find this, please know, I never wanted to leave you. I was young, scared, and I let someone else decide our fate. Not a day has passed that I haven't thought of you. I named you Ella, even though they told me not to. I hope you kept it. I hope you've known love somehow. If life ever brings us back together, I want you to know that I never stopped loving you. Nathan read it again and again. The letter trembled in his hands. He handed it back, but Ella didn't take it. I read it yesterday, she said, voice low. 3 times. I must have opened this locket 1,000 times growing up, but I never thought to peel it apart. It's like it was waiting. She walked back to the window and stared out at the street lamp flickering in the mist. I spent so much of my life asking why no one wanted me, she whispered. Every new home, every caseworker who forgot my name, I thought maybe I just wasn't enough. Nathan swallowed hard. You were always enough. She turned sharply. You didn't even know I existed. I know that, he said. And I hate that too. There was a long silence. I don't know what to do with this, she said, almost to herself. What am I supposed to feel? You're not my dad, you're just some man who loved her. And I'm just some mistake she left behind. You're not a mistake, he said. You're her daughter. You're Liam's sister. She looked down. Her voice broke. Then why didn't she come back for me? Nathan stood, slowly. I think she never forgave herself. And by the time she could, maybe she thought it was too late. Ella wiped at her face with the back of her hand. I'm not asking anything from you, Nathan said. I just want you to know that you're not alone anymore, that Maya didn't forget you, and I won't either. Ella took a breath, and then another. But instead of speaking, she moved past him, opened the door, and stood there. He understood. He left quietly. It was late afternoon when the knock came. Ella opened her front door to find Liam standing there, holding a Tupperware container of cookies and wearing an oversized raincoat. Dad said you probably didn't want to see him, he said simply. So I came instead. She stared at him. How did you get here? Uber. I'm 10, not a baby. A beat passed. Then Ella laughed, softly, incredulously. He held out the cookies. They're from the motel. Not great. She crouched down, level with his gaze. I'm sorry, she said. This is a lot for me. Liam shrugged. It's a lot for me too. But I think you're cool, and you have my mom's eyes. Ella's breath hitched. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a sketchbook. I drew something for you. She opened it slowly. Inside was a crayon drawing of 3 people on a beach. A boy, a tall man, and a woman with a necklace and a paintbrush in her hand. I told Dad, Liam said. If she's my sister, does it still count if we didn't grow up together? Ella looked up, eyes glassy. And he said yes, Liam added. But I wanted to ask you myself. Ella touched his cheek, her fingers trembling. Yes, she whispered. It counts. They stood there like that for a long moment, two hearts gently colliding in the space grief had left behind. The mural began with a single stroke of blue. Ella stood before the weathered brick wall behind Millie's diner. Linda had offered it without hesitation. A kind gesture passed with only a quiet, "It's yours if you want it." For weeks after the truth unraveled, Ella had felt disoriented, like someone trying to relearn how to stand on a shifting floor. But the brush in her hand steadied her. Painting was the first thing that made sense again. She painted in the early mornings, before her shift, and in the late hours, when the streets emptied and the wind carried only the sea's hush. With each layer, the wall transformed into light and memory, into something rooted and reaching. The mural was not literal. It was part ocean, part sky, part broken things mended in gold, like Japanese kintsugi. A blooming rose opened at the center, delicate and brave. Inside its petals was a mother and a child. Their forms abstract, but unmistakably linked by a silver thread that shimmered as the light shifted. At the bottom, almost hidden among waves, she painted 3 initials: M-E-L. It was the first time in her life she'd signed anything with a name that truly felt like hers. She began therapy shortly after that. A quiet office in town, walls lined with succulents and soft rugs. For the first few sessions, she mostly listened, to the stillness, to the weight she carried in her own breath. She talked about the letter, the pendant, the years she'd felt invisible. And slowly it shifted. Not into answers, but into understanding. "I spent so much of my life learning how to disappear," she told her therapist one afternoon. "Now I'm trying to learn how to stay." Nathan kept his distance at first, careful not to rush her. He sent a short note with Liam's next visit. "Whenever you're ready, I'd be honored to take you to Maya's grave." A week later, Ella said yes. They drove in near silence. The cemetery was on a hill above Monterey, nestled among cypress trees that bowed in the wind. Nathan walked ahead, stopping before a simple marble stone. He waited for Ella to step beside him. "Maya Lane Sterling, 1979. 2015, she gave us love, and we carry it still." Ella stood there for a long time. Her arms were crossed, the wind pressing her hair against her face. "I used to think my mother must have been weak to leave me," she said quietly. "But now I wonder if she was just a girl trying to survive." Nathan's voice was rough. "She would have loved you." Ella blinked against the sting in her eyes. "You loved her?" He nodded, all the way through. He took something from his coat pocket. A folded photo. Maya, sitting on a rock near the beach, laughing at something just out of frame. The wind in her hair, a familiar pendant glinting at her neck. Ella stared. "That's how I want to remember her," she whispered. "Alive like that." Nathan changed too, though not in the sweeping ways he'd once been known for. There were no grand declarations or announcements, just absence, first from meetings, then from boardrooms, then from the company altogether. He gave his assistant notice, let the CFO handle the next merger, started spending mornings in a cabin outside of town, where he took up woodworking with an almost monastic focus. It was something Maya used to dream of, a quieter life, less glass and steel, more wood and sky. He didn't know if it was healing, but it felt more like himself than anything had in years. And with Ella, he tried not to fix, but to be present, to show up for small things, a Saturday walk, a coffee, Liam's school project. Trust, he realized, was not built through gestures, but through showing up when there was no spotlight. Liam became the bridge that held them in place. He adored Ella with the kind of unfiltered love that children give freely. She taught him how to paint with watercolors on weekends, letting him smudge the paper and make mistakes that turned into birds or boats or stars. One rainy afternoon, he painted a picture of her. "You made me taller," she said, smiling. "You stand tall," Liam replied. Sometimes Nathan watched them from across the room. Ella bent beside Liam, her head tilted in concentration, a light in her eyes he hadn't seen since Maya. Not the same light, but familiar enough to soften something old in his chest. One evening, as they sat together eating takeout on Ella's porch, Nathan said, "You remind me of her." Ella shook her head. "I'm not trying to be her." "I know," he said. "That's not what I meant. You remind me of her, because you feel like her. Not in who you are, but in how you love." She didn't respond for a moment. Then, "She loved you?" He looked out over the trees. Fiercely. Quietly. Completely. Ella nodded slowly. Maybe I can carry some of that forward." It wasn't perfect. Sometimes the grief returned without warning. Sometimes Ella felt like an intruder in a story that had gone on too long without her. But slowly, she stitched herself into the fabric of it. She hosted a small dinner for Nathan and Liam, her first ever. Nathan brought her flowers and forgot to take his shoes off. Liam spilled juice on the table. They laughed until their sides hurt. There were no labels for what they were yet, but they were something. A family, maybe, or the beginning of one. The mural unveiling was set for a quiet Sunday evening, just after golden hour. A few dozen townspeople gathered behind Millie's, bundled in sweaters, holding paper cups of cider and coffee. The scent of rosemary and cinnamon drifted from the back kitchen, where Linda had insisted on baking something for the occasion. Ella stood near the edge of the crowd, nervously fingering the pendant at her neck. She wasn't used to this kind of attention, not for her art, not for anything. But this wasn't about attention. It was about honoring a truth long buried and now gently blooming. The mural stretched across the back wall in all its quiet splendor. Seascapes, roses, threads of silver and sky. A story told in color, a memory made whole. Liam stood beside her, grinning like he'd painted half of it himself. "Think she'd like it?" he asked. Ella smiled. "I think she'd cry." "Like you did?" She nudged him playfully. Just then she saw him. Jake Rivera, standing a little apart from the crowd. He wore a weathered brown jacket, and that same look she remembered, careful, grounded, with a steadiness she once told herself she didn't deserve. She hadn't seen him since she'd pulled away months ago, back when everything in her life had started to unravel. She'd needed space. She didn't explain. She hadn't known how. But here he was. Still, as the final words were said, Linda thanking her, someone clapping awkwardly, Jake stepped forward, slowly, as though giving her time to leave, if she wanted to. "I didn't know if you'd be here," she said softly when he reached her. "I wasn't sure I would be either," he replied. "But there was something I thought you should have." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded, time-worn piece of construction paper. Ella blinked. Her fingers shook slightly as she took it. It was a drawing, done in crayon, faded with age. A girl with long hair, holding the hand of a faceless woman under a sky full of stars. The word "Mom" was scrawled in the corner in a child's uncertain script. "I found it in a box when I was volunteering at one of the foster homes. Before I moved here, they were throwing things out. Something about this one. I don't know, I kept it." Ella stared at it, the memory beginning to ripple back. Her small hand clutching that crayon, the ache in her chest even then, not yet knowing what was missing but needing to draw it anyway. "You've had this all this time?" she whispered. Jake nodded. "Didn't know it was yours until I saw your mural. The girl in the drawing. It's the same shape as the one in the painting." Ella looked up at him. There were 1,000 things she wanted to say. About time. About how people disappear when you least expect them. About how she'd spent her whole life waiting for someone to remember her. Instead, she reached out, touched his cheek, and leaned in. She kissed him. It was soft, slow, no drama, no crescendo. Just two people standing in the cool dusk, finally ready. When she pulled back, she smiled through the tears. "Thank you," she whispered, "for remembering me when I didn't remember myself." Jake didn't speak. He didn't need to. He just pulled her in gently, holding her like something precious. Not broken, not lost. Just hers. The fire crackled low, sending little sparks upward into the evening sky. The beach was nearly empty except for them. Just the hush of waves, the scent of salt and wood smoke, and the soft, distant call of gulls circling above the Pacific. Liam's 10th birthday hadn't been elaborate. No rented bounce houses or themed cakes. Just a driftwood bonfire, a cooler with sandwiches and cupcakes, and 3 people who loved him in their quiet, steady ways. Ella sat on a blanket, her knees drawn to her chest, the pendant glinting against her collarbone in the flickering light. Not tucked away anymore, not hidden. It was a part of her story now, worn openly, like a healed scar. Jake sat beside her, his hand resting gently over hers. He didn't speak much, but his presence was a comfort, strong, grounding, the kind of silence that didn't need to be filled. Nathan approached with a small box wrapped in simple brown paper. He crouched beside Ella, looking a little unsure, as he always did now when the moment felt too big. "I had something made," he said. "It's not to replace the one you have. Nothing could. It's just something I wanted you to have, if you want it." Ella glanced at him, then unwrapped the box. Inside was a silver pendant, oval-shaped like the one she wore, but newer, smoother, etched with gentleness. She turned it over. Family is found, not just born. Her breath caught. Liam leaned over her shoulder, his mouth full of cupcake. "Whoa, you get 2 necklaces now?" Ella laughed, wiping her eyes. "Looks like it." She looked at Nathan, then pulled him into a hug before he could retreat behind a polite nod. He held her carefully, and for the first time, it didn't feel strange. Jake tossed another piece of driftwood into the fire. Liam made a wish before blowing out a candle stuck into a blueberry muffin, and together they watched the tide roll in, then out again, an endless rhythm, like breath. In a world ruled by appearances, power, and the past, it was truth, vulnerability, and love that set them free. Not the kind of love that shouts or demands or takes, but the kind that listens, waits, the kind that finds you, even if it takes a lifetime. Ella had spent her life wondering where she came from. Now she knew where she belonged. And that made all the difference.